Good morning, Skallywags, and welcome to another episode in this series of Enigmatic events. I'm Shpoo.
And I'm AJ. Branson Kane Perry was a typical American young man. He was born on February 24th, 1981. He lived with his father on Oak Street in Skidmore, Missouri. He graduated from Nottoway Holt High School in 1999. After high school, he worked odd jobs, roofing. He actually went around with this petting zoo, kind of taking care of the animals and everything. He also had a heart condition called tachycardia. Typical 20-something living his life until one day he just disappeared.
This case actually hits a little closer to home for a few reasons. First of all, of course, it takes place in our home state of Missouri. The subject's name is Branson, which is the city we live in. Branson also shares my birthday of February 24th and even has the same heart condition that I've struggled with my entire life. All of that combined with how he disappeared just absolutely makes my skin crawl. This is literally one of those stories that feels like it could happen to any one of us. And when you add all of that to just the sheer lack of evidence or suspects in the case, it just becomes even more creepy, if that's possible.
So let's take a look at the case of Branson Kane Perry. We're going to dive into the day he disappeared.
On the afternoon of Wednesday, April the 11th, 2001, Branson had invited his friend Jenna Crawford over to help clean the house that he lived in with his father, Bob. Bob had recently been hospitalized but was due home that following Friday. Meanwhile, while Branson and Jenna were cleaning the house, there were two unnamed men who were changing the alternator in Bob's car. And while it is somewhat unclear as to who hired these guys or, who asked them to change the alternator in the car, they were at the house all afternoon.
I did find it a little weird that they are not named. We couldn't find the names of these mechanics at all, but...
Right. I mean, you would think it would be at least somebody that either Bob knew or Branson knew or somebody had to know
Jenna,
these guys.
somebody.
Right.
And I'm sure they did, but during all of the research, we couldn't find the names of these mechanics. At some point during this afternoon, Branson runs into the kitchen, gets something out of a cabinet, runs outside. Jenna noticed that and thought it was weird. She didn't know what he got. She wasn't in the room. She just heard it and saw the shadow, I guess, or something like that. When he returned, it got even a little bit weirder because she was like, hey, what did you take outside? He not only didn't answer the question, but he acted like he didn't at all.
Like nothing had happened.
Nothing had happened. You're just imagining
completely
things
oblivious.
Or something. That is not a statement. That's just how I figured he would do it.
Yeah. Fast forward a couple of hours, Jenna, she goes upstairs, she takes a shower, comes back, and one of the guys that was working on the car, she actually finds him now in the kitchen going through the cabinets. And kind of similar to what happened with Branson, she asks him, hey, what are you looking for? And he kind of snaps his head towards her and immediately says nothing and just heads back outside like nothing had happened.
Yeah. I find that weird.
You're right.
I mean, you're working on a car, and unless he was looking for tools, but that's not in a cabinet. That might be in a drawer.
Again, goes back to someone had to have known these guys. I mean, they're comfortable just walking into the house. And looking through the shelves.
I get nervous walking into my friends' houses and looking for anything, if they're cooking and they're like, can you hand me this? I get uncomfortable doing that. But yeah, it happened.
But regardless, there's a lot of people going through the kitchen. We don't have any idea what that's about. So if you're wondering if that's going to come up again later, it's not.
It's not. It was just a weird little fact that was in the story and that...
Right. One of the little things in it that just kind of makes things a little more out there, I guess. But just, yeah. It's a thing.
Then about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Jenna hears the front door open. She's upstairs again, so she looks out the window. She sees Branson in the driveway, and she's like, hey, what are you doing? And he's got jumper cables, and he's like, I'm going to take these to the shed. I guess there's a shed behind the house or something. She's like, oh, okay. And she just goes back to cleaning whatever she was cleaning and stuff. That was the last time anyone has acknowledged seeing Branson. Even the two mechanics who were on the driveway, they don't even recall seeing him walking
to the shed.
To the shed. He literally said, I'm going to take these jumper cables to the shed, and then just disappeared out of thin air.
Obviously, over the next few days, nobody really knew what to think. half the people didn't even know anything was happening. I mean, after, not seeing him come back from the shed, Jenna just figured, he got sidetracked and maybe, went over to a friend's house or something. So basically, kind of like you said, she just finished what she was doing and then she took off. She went back home. Meanwhile, Bob, Branson's father, was supposed to be released from the hospital on Friday, found out kind of at the last minute that they were going to hold him a little bit longer.
Hospitals do that.
Yes, they do. He didn't have any clue that there was anything wrong, but given that he was not going to be released, he did send Joanne, which is Branson's grandmother, over to the house just to kind of check in, see how things are going. Joanne gets to the house, and she finds that Branson isn't there, but all the doors are open, the lights are on, the stereo's going, but no Branson. She just kind of assumed maybe he's out back or something, or he's in the bathroom, or I don't know, something, but she assumed he was there. She just missed him somehow.
Like he wasn't in the house,
right?
But he was in the area.
Obviously he's somewhere because the doors are open and the stereo's going, so someone's home. He's just not right here right now.
Right.
So she just kind of, closed the door and she took off.
Thinking that she had just missed her grandson, she decided to go back the next day. When she got there, kind of the same situation, except the door was closed. It was just like she left it. The radio was still on. The lights were still on. It was left in the exact state that she had seen it the day before. And yet there was still no Branson. And of course, being a grandmother, she started getting a little concerned. So she started doing what you do. You start calling people, have you seen Branson? Do you know where he is? And all this stuff. And yet no one heard from him since Jenna left the house, or since Jenna seen him walking around. That was the last known sighting. That's the word. Sighting of Branson. This is now Saturday, and her son's in the hospital, so she doesn't want to worry him. But Sunday goes around, and
her son being Bob.
Yeah, Sunday comes around, and still none of his friends, all these people she's called, all of them have gotten back with her. None of them heard from him. She then decides that she's got to tell Bob that she doesn't know where Branson is. She tells him, I got to the house, and she explains the scene that she saw and that it was the same the next day. And he starts getting a little concerned too, right. And he calls his ex-wife, Branson's mother, Becky Kleinow, that evening.
So Bob gets released from the hospital the following day, which, of course, now we're up to Monday, and he and Becky Kleinow, they meet at the police station to file a missing persons report for Branson. At this point, Branson had been missing for 5 days. So obviously they set out an investigation, and when the police arrive to take a look around the house, Bob meets up with them there. He's taking a look around, and he can't find anything of Branson's that seems out of place or missing. Even his wallet was left at home.
Yeah.
Of course, they had talked to Jenna at this point, and kind of going off what she had told them about the jumper cables and everything, they went out to the shed, took a look out there, except there were no jumper cables. They were nowhere to be found. But funny thing, fast forward 2 weeks, and suddenly the jumper cables just magically appear right where they were supposed to be, hanging right there on the back side of the door.
So it's safe to say that at this point, the story, this disappearance, has some unique and weird twists and turns in it.
A little bit.
Yeah. So, of course, the next step in any investigation when you have a missing person is you start interviewing the people who surround the person, the people in the lives.
Right.
Well, I mean, before we get to that, though, we probably should take a step back to a few days before Branson went missing, because something happened, and we probably should mention that.
Probably should dive into that one just a little bit. On April 7th of 2001, just 4 days before Branson would disappear completely without a trace, he visited the home of his neighbor, Jason Bierman, and was drugged. Unfortunately, it is completely unknown if this drugging was intentional or accidental. After all, we will find out in the investigation that Branson was dabbling in marijuana and amphetamines. So either way is entirely possible. What is known is that this drugging would lead to a rather embarrassing incident. While intoxicated, Branson stripped down nude and was just dancing all around his neighbor's house. He also shaved off all of his pubic hair and ended up having sex with Mr. Bierman.
So after the incident, Branson confessed to his father about everything that had happened. He actually was very ashamed and humiliated. He and his father both felt that he had been taken advantage of while he was in a intoxicated state or a diminished state. Bob, Branson's father, was actually so enraged at the fact that Jason Bierman had done this to his son, he made statements that he was going to get back at this man, that he was going to punish him in some way. However, with Bob being in the hospital at the time and then Branson going missing, there isn't any evidence, and the investigation didn't lead to any evidence whatsoever that there was any altercation between Bob and Jason Bierman, or even Branson and Jason Bierman after this incident, to the point that Bierman was not even made as a person of interest that I could find. There's no evidence that he took a polygraph test or anything like that, and that typically, when they have a person of interest, that's kind of one of the first things they do. So it's just one of those little incidences that happen that add up to the story.
And sometimes it's the things that aren't there that should be almost, seem like they should be, that make cases like this as weird as they are.
Yeah, it's things that you're like, but why wasn't he in investigation?
Why didn't they look at this guy?
And they might have, but there's no evidence whatsoever.
If they did, we couldn't find anything about it online.
No.
But speaking of lie detector tests, that kind of brings us back to the interviews with the people in Branson's life, many of which were given a lie detector test. According to Branson's mother, Becky, she said that police had told her that there were several people who had passed their tests, there were several people who had failed their tests, but that there simply was not sufficient evidence of any kind to make an arrest.
All in all, over 100 people were investigated during this case. They were interviewed in links to this case. So Jenna, who is the last known person to have seen Branson, of course, was someone who was interviewed probably more than once. And she did say that Branson had recently started dabbling in drugs, like recreational drug use. We're not saying he's a druggie, but he started doing marijuana and trying out some recreational drugs.
I think she specifically said dabbling in.
Yes.
So just kind of indicating he was trying some stuff, but maybe was beginning to get a little heavier into it, especially from something we'll find out here in a little bit, but we don't know to what extent.
Yeah. One family member, and it didn't say who, actually informed the police that Branson had a bottle of Valium on him the day he disappeared. And I don't know if that person, when they saw him, because in everything that we read, there was no evidence that anyone other than the two mechanics and Jenna saw him the day he disappeared, but I guess maybe they saw him with it the day before.
Or maybe, well, I mean, his father said that there was nothing missing from the house, but maybe that popped up later or something.
I don't know.
We don't know who it was that said that. We don't know how it was that they know that. We just know that someone said it.
Yeah.
And that person was a family member.
And it was put into the police record.
If you know anything about Skidmore, Missouri, there's actually a few pretty popular cases, the unsolved cases that come out of the Skidmore area. So I'm not saying that says anything about them at all, just stating a fact. But this statement about the Valium and about the dabbling would actually lead investigators to kind of expand their search a little bit. They started by questioning some of Branson's actual drug contacts there in the St. Joseph area. However, all of them, and again, this is one of those things where there's words that imply things, but we don't know how many there were, just that it says all of them. Basically, all of them said that, they hadn't seen him. They all did pass a polygraph. So the police expanded their search even further into the entire kind of drug community there in the Skidmore area. And yet, despite rumors that Branson owed money to multiple drug dealers, which, of course, is always bad news, there were absolutely no discernible leads or evidence that was uncovered by this little investigation.
I mean, it could have just been rumors. Like
It could have been.
A kid who's been dabbling goes missing. Like
Right.
Those
right.
tend to be rumors.
Or, I mean, it could just be people that, somebody knows that he's dabbling.
Yeah.
So obviously he's a big druggie and, oh, I heard he owes money. That's why he's disappeared. People talk. Small towns, people talk. Rumors start.
So there's no evidence of
No.
any of this other than the dabbling. They have
Right.
confirmed that he was dabbling, but there's no evidence that any of that links to his disappearance.
Nope.
And there's no evidence that he was doing anything more than dabbling.
Right. But basically, with that, the investigation pretty much hit the wall. It stopped at a complete dead end.
During the early days of the investigation, Bob, Branson's father, suspected that his son might have gone to visit friends in Kansas City because he had been embarrassed by that whole incident with the neighbor.
Right.
Mr. Perry said that he had known of his son's sexuality for a really long time. There was no secret about it, but that he felt that his son was embarrassed because he had been so easily taken advantage of by this neighbor, and that he thought that Branson, it was too much for him, that he had to get out of town for a little bit. And that's his initial thought in what had happened with his son. Branson didn't have a working car. Bob's car was still being worked on. I don't think it got fixed. And so he thought that Branson would have hitchhiked from Skidmore to Kansas City. However, there was no evidence. No one saw him or has come forward to say they saw him on the road or anything. At one point, this is after the investigation has gone on for a while, the family got a little bit, you want answers. Yeah. So they reached out to psychics. Unfortunately, all of their, leads led nowhere. They were, of course, dead ends as well.
So where is Branson? Unfortunately, we may never know. Did he simply run away? Did he try to hide from an embarrassing encounter? Was he taken? Is he alive? Is he dead? And if he was taken, or if he is dead, who's responsible?
To try to answer your last question, there are no suspects. There are no possible suspects to go on at this time, or at least the police have said they don't have a prime suspect. They don't have a person of interest, except for one man. This man isn't someone who was in the case at the beginning. He wasn't someone they interviewed. He had no involvement with Skidmore, drug scene, Branson, the humiliating, embarrassing thing. This man is someone who is a strange woven story in this. It's weird.
And it's entirely possible not even possible. It's entirely literal that he's not even a suspect in this case. But there's
he could be?
There's a little something there, perhaps.
Well, I guess we should explain.
Sure.
Okay.
The man's name is Jack Wayne Rogers. You might actually remember this one because back in 2003, this 59-year-old Presbyterian preacher and Boy Scout leader made headlines when he was arrested on charges of first-degree assault and practicing medicine without a license after he removed a trans woman's genitalia in a sort of makeshift gender reassignment surgery in a hotel room in Columbia, Missouri.
So what does this man have to do with this case? What does he have to do with the disappearance of Branson? Well, maybe nothing, but possibly something. When the police were investigating him for the crimes that he was arrested for, they were going through his stuff. They were going through his computers, his cars, and everything. And on his computers, they found a bunch of really disturbing things. They found child pornography.
Right.
They also found some messages on a message board that are pretty damning and could possibly connect to this case.
Using the screen names Buggerbutt, Oh Hail Satan, and Extreme Body Mods.
You just wanted to say bugger butt.
But, of course, who doesn't? Rogers, basically, he used these message boards to describe just very graphic torture and assault and murder of young men. In fact, also embedded in these posts, he described cannibalizing the genitals that he had castrated from various young men. And among these posts was one about Rogers picking up a young hitchhiker, a thin, young, blonde male hitchhiker, and then raping him, and then torturing him, and then mutilating him, and finally, eventually, murdering him.
In these online posts, Rogers said that he disposed of the body. he buried him in the Ozarks, in a remote area in the Ozarks,
which there are a lot.
There are. But that also places him in the area of, Skidmore. It could be around there. It could be around where we are, for that matter. But the description of the hitchhiker had a strong resemblance to Branson. However, when the police questioned Rogers about this story, this message that they found on his computer, he denied it. He denied ever actually picking up a hitchhiker. He denied seeing Branson. He denied knowing Branson. He literally said that the story was just that, a fantasy, a fabrication of his mind. It was nothing more than pure fantasy of what he wanted to do, but he didn't act.
Cannibal fan fiction.
Yes. Law enforcement, of course, thought it's too coincidental. It's too real. However, there's no evidence. No evidence that connected him to Branson. Even with all of that, law enforcement believed that this was an online confession of a murder.
In fact, while they were performing a subsequent investigation through some of Rogers' vehicles, they actually found a turtle claw necklace that was very, very similar to one that Branson had. Unfortunately, they couldn't get any kind of physical evidence or DNA off of this particular necklace, and the necklace itself being something that was just sold retail.
It's a very generic.
Yeah, they couldn't exactly say, oh, well, this was definitely his. But now you've got a story that matches his description, and you actually find a necklace that is identical to one that Branson wore. It's like trying to shove those pieces in together, but they don't
quite connect. When I was doing the research for this, they did say that he was wearing he wore the necklace all the time. It's kind of like
it's kind of like me with mine. Yeah.
It's not something that was in the house. It was something that was on him. I don't know. It's too coincidental.
Right. Basically, we've said it before. We'll say it again 1,000 more times. Where there's smoke, there's fire. One or two coincidences are just that, a couple of coincidences. But when those coincidences start to add up and start to answer some questions,
it's a pattern, or it's
a pattern begins to form.
Yeah.
This is the one we've got. I mean, this is all we've got.
Yeah.
Is this guy.
Well, in April of 2004, Rogers was convicted, and he was sentenced to 17 years in prison for the assault.
This is for the gender reassignment.
Yeah, not Branson.
Not Branson.
It was the one in the hotel room.
Right.
So 17 years for that assault. 7 years for performing the surgery illegally. 30 years for the child pornography that they found on his computer. And all of these are going to be run concurrent. At the sentencing, Becky, Branson's mother, actually stood up and begged Rogers to give her any clue, let me know where he is. Please let me know where he is. But Rogers, again, in court, said he had nothing to do with this boy's disappearance. He had nothing to do with him. He doesn't know who Branson is, and just denied everything.
And something about this little outburst of his kind of changed Becky's heart. So much, in fact, that she came out of the sentencing no longer feeling that Rogers was the guy. In fact, she went as far as to say, and I quote, "The police are not completely ruling him out, but now the investigation has turned towards Skidmore again. They have received some new leads there. I suppose time has a way of unraveling secrets. I believe someone in that area knows what happened to Branson. In my heart, I don't believe this suspect is responsible. Despite the nightmare I lived through at his sentencing, I am thankful that someone with that much evil will never walk the streets again."
And as this case goes, not much has happened since. This is pretty much brings us up to date, and we're at 2004.
17 years now almost, yeah. And no new info of any kind, pretty much.
In 2004, Branson's dad, Bob, passed away. In June of 2009, law enforcement revealed that they were going to be digging up a site in Quitman, Missouri, after receiving a credible tip in the Branson case. They received a tip that his remains may have been there. So over a period of 2 days, they actually dug a 23-foot deep hole that was 20 foot by 40 feet. Another local farmer who lived like a mile and a half away stated that the law enforcement had also been on his properties for several years prior and was looking at an abandoned well. However, none of these searches yielded any kind of evidence that has been released, and there was no body found. found.
In 2010, Becky Kleino offered up a $20,000 reward for any information that might lead to Branson's whereabouts. She also passed away in 2011 after a years-long battle with melanoma. Family and friends promised her before she passed away that they would continue looking for Branson until he is found.
In her obituary, it was actually stated that she was preceded in death by her son Branson. She was buried next to an empty plot. It's been left open for Branson when they find his remains. I guess there's a headstone on the plot with his name and a date, and it's the date he went missing, and that is April 11th, 2001, and it's all that remains right next to her. It's so sad.
Yeah. So, once again, all we really have is a possible suspect. I mean, not even a real suspect. Just a guy who wrote a story and had a necklace, both of which happen to connect to this case. Otherwise, no connection whatsoever. And that's it. We have no other possible suspects, no other people of interest.
I wish I would have known more about the mechanics because I find some of the behavior a little suspicious there, but the police obviously haven't, or they haven't released that.
Well, what's interesting is that the reports felt that the mechanics coming into the house and looking through the kitchen, that was important enough information to include in the report.
But it wasn't, but there's no follow-up.
Who are they? What were they looking for? Did they find it? Are they responsible? Are they suspects? Were they questioned? Were they polygraphed? We simply do not know.
And I don't even think, because Becky, Branson's mother, had a website up. She created her own website to find Branson, and she kept updating it as the police were telling her things. Even on her website, there's nothing about more than 2 unnamed mechanics. There's nothing more about it. I find that suspicious. I do find it's just too coincidental that this man invents this story of he described someone that looked very much like Branson hitchhiking in the same time frame. It's just too.
And then after
much.
They start kind of following him for that, then all of a sudden they find a necklace that also matches. I mean, I don't know. What do you guys think? Let us know down in the comments below. Do you think that Rogers is responsible for it? Do you think that he, maybe he just felt that he, isn't spending life in prison, so getting out eventually is better than nothing at all. So I'm not confessing to anything, or what? Do you think it maybe is the mechanics? Do you think it's someone else? Let us know what you believe down in the comments below.
And while you're out here on the internet, be sure to follow us on all our social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and also while you're here, be sure to like, comment, share, and most important, hit that subscribe button. It's just one little button, and you'll get all kinds of stuff. We do have content every Monday through Friday, and that is a different show every week, except this one. It's twice a week, but it's a little something for everyone. Yeah.
And even if you don't feel like doing all those other things, at the very least, drop us a comment. Let us know your thoughts, let us know your theories, and most importantly, let us know what you would like to see next in this series of enigmatic events. Thanks for watching.
Bye.